June 6, 1944. Before dawn, at a German observation post designated Widerstandsnest 62, a soldier peers into the haze over the English Channel. Through his rangefinder, he identifies several large ships and makes a routine report. Minutes later, he looks again. His professional calm vanishes. The horizon is no longer a line separating sea and sky. It is a solid, unbroken mass of steel, stretching from edge to edge of his vision. An entire city, impossibly floating on the water, and it is all moving directly toward him. This was Operation Neptune, the naval heart of D-Day, the largest amphibious assault in history. But to understand its true impact, we must look beyond the spectacle and deconstruct this armada. The German High Command knew an invasion was coming. They had spent 4 years preparing. The question then is not if they were ready, but why the sheer physical scale of what appeared that morning paralysed their entire response. For the Allies, assembling this force was a logistical puzzle of unprecedented scale. For 2 years, southern England had been transformed into a vast military base, secretly accumulating the men and material for the invasion. The challenge was not just gathering thousands of vessels, but launching them in a coordinated wave across the notoriously treacherous English Channel, a plan entirely dependent on a fragile 5-day window of favourable weather and specific tidal conditions. On the other side of the Channel, the German problem was the inverse: how to defend a coastline stretching nearly 3,000 miles. This was the Atlantic Wall, but in many sectors, the wall was a fortress built more of propaganda than concrete. Worse, its command was fatally divided. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, tasked with its defence, was convinced the invasion had to be defeated on the beaches, at the water's edge. His superior, Field Marshal von Rundstedt, commander-in-chief in the west, clung to traditional doctrine. Let the enemy land, then crush them with a decisive counterattack from powerful panzer divisions held in reserve. This disagreement paralysed German strategy, and it was compounded by a shared, catastrophic miscalculation. Both commanders and their intelligence services were certain the main Allied assault would target the Pas de Calais, the shortest sea crossing. As a result, the bulk of Germany's strongest forces were waiting for an invasion that would never come. By late May 1944, the Allied armada was finally ready. But as the launch window opened, their greatest enemy wasn't the German army, it was the sky itself. The point of no return came not on a beach, but in a smoke-filled library. On the evening of June 5th at his headquarters in Southwick House, Supreme Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower faced a decision that could win or lose the war in a single night. The invasion had already been postponed 24 hours by a massive storm. Now his chief meteorologist, Group Captain James Stagg, presented a terrifyingly narrow window of improving weather. The forecast was a gamble. Postpone again and the specific tide and moonlight conditions would be lost for weeks, compromising the entire operation. Go and a resurgent storm could annihilate the fleet in the Channel. After polling his senior commanders, the final, crushing weight of command settled on him. His words were quiet, almost anticlimactic. Okay, let's go. The machine was in motion. It could not be recalled. Across the Channel, the first sign of the invasion wasn't a visual, it was a sound. A low, continuous rumble that grew into a deafening, earth-shaking roar. At 5:50 a.m., the Allied bombardment fleet opened fire. This was the steel fist of the Armada, a collection of naval artillery unmatched in history. 7 battleships, including the American USS Nevada, a resurrected survivor of Pearl Harbor, and the British HMS Warspite, a grizzled veteran of the First World War's Battle of Jutland. Alongside them, 24 cruisers and over 100 destroyers hurled thousands of high-explosive shells at the concrete bunkers of the Atlantic Wall. For the German soldiers of the 716th Infantry Division, huddled inside their positions, it was the start of a nightmare. The goal wasn't to sink ships, it was to suppress, to blind, and to terrorise the defenders just long enough for the next wave to arrive. Through the smoke and spray, the second layer of the invasion materialised. It was a sight that defied all German military doctrine, a tide of flat-bottomed boats, an endless, churning swarm of landing craft. They were not a single entity, but a complex, specialised ecosystem. The largest were the LSTs, landing ship tank, over 300 feet long, designed to run aground and open their massive bow doors, disgorging tanks and trucks directly onto the sand. Smaller, faster LCIs, landing craft infantry, carried 200 men each, deploying them down narrow ramps on either side. And at the very tip of the spear were the smallest, most vulnerable vessels, the plywood LCVP Higgins boats, each carrying a single 36-man platoon into the kill zone. This was the moment of truth for the coastal defenders. This was not a naval raid, it was a full-scale ground assault arriving from the sea. In his observation post overlooking the sector the Allies had codenamed Omaha Beach, Major Werner Pluskat of the 352nd Infantry Division stared through his artillery binoculars in disbelief. His initial reports of a handful of ships were now grotesquely obsolete. What he saw was, in his later words, a city on the sea. When he frantically reported the scale of the fleet to his superiors, the response was incredulity. They assumed he was exaggerating, mistaking the morning mist for ships. The German command structure, already blinded by its focus on the Pas-de-Calais, could not process the reality of what its own officer was seeing. The alarm was sounding, but no one in authority truly believed it. And even what Pluskat could see was only part of the story. Hidden within and behind the assault waves was a vast, nearly invisible fleet of organisers. Before any battleship fired a shot, nearly 300 minesweepers had spent the night methodically clearing 10 safe channels through the dense German minefields. A silent, nerve-wracking task where one mistake meant annihilation. Coordinating the chaos from just offshore were command ships like the USS Ancon, floating headquarters packed with communications gear, linking the generals on land with the admirals at sea. And trailing the fleet were the humble tugboats and salvage vessels, the mechanics of the invasion, ready to tow damaged ships and clear wreckage to keep the sea lanes open. This was the logistical depth of the operation, a layer of planning the defenders could not see but would soon feel. Finally, as the sun climbed higher, the last and most psychologically devastating layer of the armada revealed itself. Anchoring 5 to 10 miles offshore, a forest of masts and hulls began to fill the horizon. This wasn't the assault force, this was the follow-on force. Over 4,000 transport ships and cargo vessels, a floating metropolis carrying hundreds of thousands more men, millions of tons of ammunition, fuel and food. This was the visual proof that the Allies were not here for a battle, they were here to stay. This was not an army, it was a nation, moving itself across the water. The sight of this inexhaustible reserve, waiting patiently offshore, was perhaps the single most demoralising moment for the German soldiers on the beaches. They weren't just outnumbered, they were being systematically erased by an industrial-scale machine. The figure that defines Operation Neptune is 6,939 vessels. But this number, the largest in naval history, is often misunderstood. It doesn't represent the fleet seen at dawn on June 6th. That figure comes from the official post-war accounting by British naval historian Captain Stephen Roskill, and it includes every ship that took part through the end of the month. The real psychological blow wasn't just the ships present, but the terrifying message they sent. This was merely the first wave of a logistical reality so vast it was almost abstract. A reality the German command now had to comprehend, with the fate of Europe hanging on their response. As reports flooded German headquarters, the picture became terrifyingly clear. They came not from one location, but 5. Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau and Sword. A 50-mile front. This was the main invasion. Field Marshal von Rundstedt ordered the immediate release of the panzer reserves for a counterattack. The order was denied. The divisions were under the direct control of Adolf Hitler, and Hitler was asleep. His senior military aide, General Jodl, refused to wake him, believing it could still be a diversion for Pas-de-Calais. Compounding the chaos, Field Marshal Rommel was unreachable in Germany. While the Allies bled for every inch of sand, the German command structure was paralysed. The decisive first hours, the only window to destroy the beachheads, were lost to indecision, protocol, and a sleeping Führer. That German soldier, the first to report a few ships, was witnessing the precise moment a strategic reality became a physical one. The war in the West was being decided not simply by the courage of soldiers, but by the spreadsheets of planners and the output of factories. The armada was the result, a weapon of logistics so vast it could be seen, but not truly understood until the chance to defeat it was gone. It was the ultimate expression of industrial warfare. On June 6, 1944, the Atlantic Wall was not breached, it was submerged.